The real life of civilians under the Nazi regime, real. 1945, the shape of defeat. It was 1945. The Reich had ceased to exist, but its corpse was still bleeding. German cities, from Hamburg to Dresden, from Munich to Königsberg, had become open graves. There was no water, there was no electricity, there was no order. Mothers boiled whatever they could find, potato peels, grass, even crushed bits of brick, to extract a white dust that tricked the stomach. The war had moved into the home. Defeat had seeped into the bones. On the outskirts of Berlin, women dragged carts with their children inside, some asleep, some dead, covered by a sheet or by indifference. Some wore party dresses now caked in dirt, the last memory the flames hadn't taken. Home, as an idea, dissolved, walls no longer protected, streets led nowhere. Neighbours watched neighbours, driven by hunger or fear. Everything had changed since the Germany of 1933. Rewind to 1933. The morning of January 30th, 1933, brought no wind of war and no obvious tragedy. Berlin's winter was as grey as ever. Trams screeched on icy rails. But something different hung in the air. The radio announced in a steady, controlled voice that President Hindenburg had appointed Adolf Hitler Chancellor of the Reich. For some, it was just another switch in a chain of unstable governments. For others, it was a contained joy that would spill into the streets by night. Torches and promise. That night, torches lit the Brandenburg Gate. Thousands marched down Unter den Linden, cheering and waving red flags marked with a black swastika inside a white circle. Families watched from balconies as if witnessing a ceremony. There was joy. There was hope. It felt like the redemption of Germany had begun. Inflation, unemployment, the humiliation of Versailles, the chaos of the Weimar Republic. Suddenly, these burdens seemed to lift. This wasn't just a change in government. It felt like salvation. Working-class doubts, empty stomachs. In working-class neighborhoods, the reaction was mixed. Some watched the militarized parade with suspicion, remembering beatings from brown shirts in previous years. But even there, amid misery and distrust, the words slipped out. Maybe now things will change. An empty stomach leaves little room for principles when the future is a shadow. The middle class embraces the order. The middle class, shopkeepers, clerks, retirees, embraced the new order quickly. They had been the losers of the 1920s. Inflation devoured their savings. Strikes and riots led nowhere. Parties promised and failed. When Hitler spoke of unity, greatness, order, and discipline, many felt their dignity was finally being returned. Sundays in cafes stopped being about bread prices and turned to talk of the future. Daily life rewritten. Change moved fast. School portraits of Hindenburg came down and Hitler's went up. In public squares, children learned to salute. In shops, some merchants quietly removed foreign goods. In churches, sermons began to speak of the spiritual rebirth of the German people. There weren't yet laws for everything. There weren't camps everywhere. There weren't uniforms on every street, but a new language spread: exclusion, pride, destiny. A voice in every room. Radios sold fast. The People's Receiver was launched that year. Cheap, simple, made so millions could listen. And they did, in dining rooms, workshops, and barbershops. Hitler's voice became an omnipresent presence, sharp, prophetic, absolutely certain. He persuaded many who had never read Mein Kampf or fully understood the plans. He sounded authentic. He sounded strong. In times of crisis, strength convinces, belonging for the young. Youth organizations swelled. Thousands of teenagers joined the Hitler Youth or the League of German Girls, not all out of belief. Many went because their friends went, because their parents suggested it, because it was how to fit in. Brown uniforms, badges, songs, hikes, knife games, marches in the woods. These gave a sense of belonging no school or parish had offered. Small gestures at home. At home, the shift showed in small ways. Letters spoke of hope. After dinner talk attacked communists more openly. Jokes about Jews, once whispered, were told with laughter. A shopkeeper put up a sign, "Aryan business." Not out of deep ideology, but because the neighbour had done it. Neutrality no longer felt safe. You applauded or you stayed silent, and even silence looked suspicious. May Day, then the trap. May 1st, Labour Day, became a national holiday. Parades, fireworks, balloons, patriotic speeches, millions joined, unaware that the next day independent unions would be broken and replaced by the German Labour Front under party control. While people celebrated in the streets, workers' freedom died in silence. There were no protests, some out of fear, many out of indifference, others because they thought this was right. Order with a cost. By the end of the first year, many felt life had improved. Unemployment fell thanks to public works. Highways, stadiums, housing projects rose. Promises became achievements. Bread lines shortened. Streets were cleaner. Trains ran on time. The state seemed efficient, present, everywhere. But behind the efficiency, repression spread. The Communist Party was banned. Leaders were arrested or disappeared. Some fled. The Social Democrats followed. The press was coordinated, radio centralized. Books were reviewed. News of camps opening in places like Dachau and Oranienburg wasn't hidden, but many chose not to care. They must have done something, people said, or they said nothing. At family gatherings, politics faded, or it surfaced only as cliches, quotes, and knowing smiles. Everyone knew a neighbour might be listening, a cousin could denounce, a butcher, a teacher, even your own child could repeat what they heard at school. Denunciation became a silent form of loyalty, useful for advancement, revenge, or simply survival. And fear seeped under the door, into the bedroom, into the pauses between words. 1934 to 1935, the choreography of obedience. The fervour of 1933 didn't vanish. Flags still hung, speeches still blared, stadiums still filled. But as 1934 wore on, enthusiasm hardened into a quiet choreography of obedience. Life demanded caution, silence, conformity. Gleichschaltung, forced coordination, wasn't a word used at dinner, but it was daily reality. Civil life organized itself under unofficial, omnipresent surveillance. Local associations turned into networks of ideological control. Street corner chats were watched, the block leader. On every block, a block leader linked the party and the neighborhood. He could be a shopkeeper, a doorman, a retiree. His past didn't matter. His job was to record, listen, and report. He knew the neighbors knew him. He didn't have to say much. His presence drew the lines. School as an engine. At home, parents measured their words. Children came back from school repeating slogans, singing songs, asking whether the greetings at home matched those in class. School had become an arm of the party. Teachers, some convinced, others resigned, were brought into the National Socialist Teachers' League. Textbooks were rewritten. History began in 1914 and ended in 1933, as if the Weimar years were a flicker. Biology explained racial differences. Math problems asked about the cost of maintaining a hereditarily ill person. German class memorized passages from Mein Kampf. Quiet compliance and small-town duplicity. Parents who disagreed learned to stay quiet. Some burned books on their own. Others hid photographs of Jewish relatives. Many stopped talking politics. It was easier to teach children to repeat what they heard outside, even if no one believed it inside. In small towns, the double life showed starkly. Everyone knew who had been a communist, who had liberal ideas, who had traded with Jews. And now everyone pretended they had always been loyal. Forgetting became a defense. Work under the German Labour Front. Work didn't escape. With unions gone, every worker fell under the German Labour Front. Wage talks disappeared. Strikes vanished overnight. Factories changed. People worked more and spoke less. Employees competed to look loyal. Who greeted first, who hung the flag, who gave most to winter relief. Merit started to matter less than party affiliation. Promotions and dismissals often hinged on what you represented to the new order. A narrow role for women. Women were steered into a narrow role, mothers and guardians of the home. The Deutsches Frauenwerk and the NS Frauenschaft organized meetings, cooking classes, talks on racial hygiene, sewing groups, and child-rearing lessons. It looked like a domestic support network, but every meeting carried slogans, songs, and training. The ideal woman was strong, fertile, obedient. The state needed her not only to raise children, but to raise future soldiers. Women who worked outside the home, in offices, post offices, hospitals, were reminded that their true place was the kitchen. Leisure directed. Free time was reorganized. Kraft durch Freude, strength through joy, offered excursions, courses, concerts, and activities for workers. It looked like a better life. But every outing came wrapped in symbols, speeches, flags. Every song taught a message. Even rest was guided. Choice faded. The press in lockstep. The press fell early. By 1934, most independent papers had disappeared or been absorbed by party-friendly publishers. Reading the newspaper became predictable. All news was good. Germany was reborn. The economy was rising. The leader was loved. Bad news was what never appeared. Some homes kept pre-1933 newspapers like relics. Others tuned small, clandestine radios to catch foreign signals. The risk was real. Listening could mean prison. Talking about it could mean something worse. Purge at the top. In June 1934, the regime consolidated power through crime. During the Night of the Long Knives, the SA, early stormtroopers, were purged. Ernst Röhm and other leaders were killed on direct orders from above. The killings were explained as a necessary, preventive measure. Many believed it, or pretended to, because crime no longer caused scandal. It had become justice. Power merged. Justice blurred into obedience. Laws stopped protecting and started disciplining. When Hindenburg died in August 1934, the Republic's fate was sealed. Hitler assumed the title of Führer and Reich Chancellor, unifying head of state and head of government. A national plebiscite followed, votes cast in a climate of pressure, surveillance and propaganda. Voting was mandatory, ballots were watched. In many towns, everyone knew who hadn't voted. Democracy, already dying, was buried with public honors. Most didn't mourn. Stability felt more valuable than freedom. Fading from the picture, Jews began to be pushed out of daily life. By 1935, the Nuremberg laws turned discrimination into policy. But even before that, the exclusion was visible. Cafe signs said, "Jews not allowed." Bank procedures grew difficult if your surname sounded Jewish. In markets, some women avoided non-Aryan shops. Physical violence wasn't necessary. Social rejection was enough. The look that turned away, the greeting withheld. People who had been part of the community started to vanish from the scene without a shout. Silence did the work. In 2 years, public space was remade. Streets were saturated with symbols, swastikas on buildings, uniforms everywhere, portraits of the leader in schools, stations, pharmacies, conversations controlled, emotions measured. At home, some remembered the recent past, but the present grew louder. Resisting was dangerous. Adapting was easier. Most adapted. When law draws the line. Starting in September 1935, exclusion became law. At the Party Congress in Nuremberg, the regime enacted the law for the protection of German blood and honor and the Reich citizenship law. Overnight, lives changed brutally. Jews ceased to be citizens. They lost nationality and civil rights, voting, holding public office, marrying non-Jews. Beyond the legal text, the atmosphere flipped. Exclusion became official, accepted, administered. In cafes, former Jewish patrons stopped appearing. Some were quietly pushed out, others understood they weren't welcome. Shopkeepers who kept serving Jewish customers received warnings, anonymous notes, visits from party men. Barbers hung signs promising Aryan service. Pharmacies that filled prescriptions from Jewish doctors were watched. No shouting was needed. Everyone saw the line. Schoolyards turned cold. Schools followed. Jewish children were first ignored, then insulted, then separated. Principals reported the number of non-Aryan students and justified transfers with talk of harmonization. Biology classes taught racial science students measured skulls to sort profiles and identify degenerate types. Children repeated without understanding, but they learned suspicion against the classmate whose last name didn't sound German enough. Recess changed, games excluded, shoves and laughter mixed with mockery, spit and contempt. Culture starts to close. Cultural life shifted too. Cinemas began to remove films directed by or starring Jews. Theatres dismissed actors and musicians with inconvenient surnames. Publishers cancelled contracts. Universities annulled chairs. None of it happened in secret. Lists appeared. Replacements were announced. The cleansing of the German spirit was celebrated. With few exceptions, the public took it as natural. Some protested in whispers, others mourned in private. Almost no one wrote letters, signed complaints, or raised a hand in a meeting. Neighbours turned away. Social ties began to snap. Neighbours who had shared dinners and birthdays with Jewish families started avoiding them. Not always out of conviction, often out of fear. A brief visit, a clumsy word, a smile at the wrong time could be noticed. The block leader took note, and the risk was real. One denunciation, anonymous, false, or malicious, could trigger an investigation, an interrogation, a punishment. Friendship became suspicious. A greeting became dangerous. Silence became a shield. Life under tension. Jewish families lived under constant pressure. Parents had to explain to their children why they couldn't return to the same school, why their mother could no longer shop in a certain store, why the birthday invitation stopped. Many tried to keep routines, reading, studying, visiting grandparents, writing letters. But the days filled with refusals, closed doors, and eyes that looked away. Some tried to adapt. Others began to plan to emigrate. But visas, tickets, destinations, everything was harder each week. The world wasn't opening, it was closing. Normalization and blame. Outside those homes, most civilians normalized the exclusion. They didn't think about it, they didn't ask. Some even cheered. Propaganda supplied the script. Jews were blamed for defeat, for post-war misery, for cultural decay, for international plots. Children's magazines printed grotesque caricatures, newsreels preached racial hygiene. Words were repeated until they lost their weight. No one argued, people had learned not to. Others targeted, conscience aligned. Exclusion widened. Roma families, people persecuted under morality laws, Jehovah's Witnesses and people with disabilities felt the pressure. Most civilians didn't know details, or they knew and didn't ask. What wasn't seen didn't hurt. What was seen was accepted. Gleichschaltung didn't just coordinate institutions, it aligned consciences. The average citizen learned what to say, when to be quiet, what to look at, and what to avoid. They learned to live inside the lines and not to help those outside them. On the radio, speeches grew harsher. Purity, destiny, duty. In stadiums, salutes multiplied. Crowds repeated every gesture and slogan precisely. Beneath the synchrony, something deeper hardened, the renunciation of the other. Many accepted that some people did not deserve the same rights, were not part of the whole. That acceptance, even passive, cleared the way for what came next. Paper walls, public offices handed out new forms. Parents' and grandparents' origin had to be declared. It wasn't enough to be German, you had to prove it. That proof became a requirement for marriage, work, and study. Those who couldn't demonstrate full ancestry were removed, sometimes without explanation, sometimes with a letter citing the interests of the Reich. People who had been full citizens became residents without rights. A single line in an ancestry chart could brand a family as pariahs. Mixed families buckled under the strain. A Jewish wife, a non-Aryan father, a converted uncle, one detail could split a household. Some chose divorce, others resigned their jobs. Some offed themselves or vanished. Family gatherings turned fearful. Who would attend? What could be said? Who would denounce whom? Belonging was no longer cultural, it was biological. No one could change it. The mask of normal. And still, daily life continued. Trains ran on time, bakeries opened, parks filled with children. Women lined up at the market, men read the paper. It did not look like a dictatorship. It looked orderly, clean, calm. Beneath that surface, a precise machine of exclusion and slow destruction kept turning. Most people didn't ask for blood. They didn't ask for camps or pogroms. But they accepted the symbolic disappearance of the Jewish neighbour, the silence, the inner exile, the steady expulsion. Not from loud cruelty, but from indifference, fear and habit. The Third Reich wasn't upheld by violence alone. It was upheld by the comfort of those who chose not to look. In 1935 and 1936, Germany wasn't yet a concentration camp. It was an orderly, enthusiastic, convinced society. But inside that enthusiasm, tragedy hid. Every smile for marching youth, every nod at a shuttered Jewish store, every whisper celebrating purity, laid another stone on the road to the abyss. Youth captured. At 10, boys entered the Hitler Youth, and girls, the League of German Girls. Free time stopped being free. Afternoons filled with marching, singing, drills, outdoor tasks, community work, and indoctrination. Weekends meant camping or visits to battle memorials. Holidays were spent in party camps. Even birthday parties reinforced discipline, salutes, pride in the portrait on the living room wall, distrust of anything different. School rewritten, school bowed to the state. History began with Germanic greatness and ended with Hitler's arrival. The medieval past was glorified. The 1918 defeat was retold as a stab in the back by Jews, communists and traitors. Geography taught lost territories as future expansion. Natural sciences explained Nordic superiority. Gymnastics took more hours than literature. The body had to be strong, useful, resistant. Critical thinking drew suspicion. The ideal student marched, repeated, obeyed. Home under pressure. At home, some parents supported this with sincere enthusiasm. Others complied from fear. Refusing to send a child to youth groups looked subversive. Cases circulated where children denounced their own parents for unnational attitudes. Stories spread with morbid pride. The party celebrated that loyalty. A new morality took root. Obedience to the state above family ties. Distrust grew in the heart of the home, a showcase and a mask. In 1936, Germany hosted the Olympic Games. Flags, monuments, athletes, tourists. The perfection dazzled the world. The regime softened its face for the cameras. Anti-Semitic signs came down. Street attacks paused. A few Jewish athletes appeared as a calculated gesture. For 15 days, Germany looked modern, tolerant, vibrant. It was a mask. When the cameras left, the machinery returned to its usual rhythm. No neutral space. Civil life soaked in party ritual. Weddings exalted Aryan fertility. Birthdays included official songs. Children's books cast blonde heroes against hook-nosed villains. Every shop, office and salon had a portrait on the wall. Station signs warned of the internal enemy. The salute began classes, neighborhood meetings, theater shows. Neutral spaces disappeared. Propaganda reached the trivial. Matchboxes carried slogans. School notebooks showed the leader's face. Calendars marked party anniversaries. Christmas cards displayed repurposed pagan symbols. Stores promoted Aryan products. Buying chocolate or soap turned political. The home became an extension of the state. People adapted, some out of belief, many out of habit. Those who didn't sympathize learned to pretend. Appearances mattered more than ideas. You could survive if you knew when to salute, what to read, whom to avoid. Mass culture offered the comfort of belonging, parades, shows, celebrations, and fear. Fear felt lighter, wrapped in music and flags. Between patriotic songs and organized outings, between radio speeches and carefully edited films, people lived a deformed normality. Propaganda wasn't just an institution, it was the air, at school, in the square, beside the bed. Minds were shaped daily. After a few years, millions couldn't tell truth from repetition. They marched straight, smiled on cue and said Heil Hitler, even when they no longer knew why. Leisure as policy. By late 1937, life seemed stable. The economy hummed, public works advanced, speeches promised greatness and unity, but the balance was false. Fear had become a habit, and the regime knew control wasn't enough, it had to seduce. So rest became an instrument. Strength through joy stepped into the center. This vast arm of the German Labour Front offered cheap packages: trips, excursions, art classes, lectures, concerts, cinema tickets, theatre plays, even Mediterranean cruises. Vacations were crafted to reinforce identity, blur class lines, and cultivate a collective spirit. A working-class family that had never left its street might see the Baltic, climb a mountain, or sail to Norway on the Wilhelm Gustloff. Every itinerary carried an ideological spine: Germanic sites, lectures on values, collective dinners and national hymns. Party representatives came along to ensure proper behaviour and note suspicious attitudes. Rest was monitored and surveillance felt like order. Travellers' patriotism, domestic tourism boomed. Bavarian Alps, Thuringian Forest, Black Forest, medieval castles. Geography wore national symbolism. Travel became patriotic. Guides dropped neutrality and preached landscapes purified of a Jewish spirit and regions tied to Germanic blood. Maps marked mythical sites of the movement: Linz, Nuremberg, Berchtesgaden. Each stop deepened the sense of belonging. Festivals and discipline. Cities filled with party-organized festivals: Labor Days, Peasant Days, Mother's Days, always parades, hymns, speeches, rituals. Each date carried a lesson: honor manual labor, exalt Aryan fertility, thank the leader. The line between celebration and discipline vanished. Crowds came not only from conviction, but because absence drew suspicion. Sports under the state. Sports clubs from the Weimar years were absorbed. Healthy competition gave way to training with an ideological purpose. Children and teenagers received military instruction disguised as exercise. Endurance, toughness, and sacrifice were lifted up. Women were guided into gymnastics linked to maternal health. The body was not a space of freedom, it was a tool of the state. 1939, war arrives. September 1st, 1939 began like any other morning. Radios on, papers delivered, trams moving. Before noon, a voice cut in. After provocations, German troops had crossed into Poland. Germany was at war, emotions mixed: enthusiasm, fear, resignation, obedience. Few protested, most didn't imagine catastrophe. The trenches of 1914 felt distant. Propaganda insisted it would be short, just, preventive. Streets filled not with mourning, but with posters, instructions, meetings. Bloc leaders were summoned. 6 years of discipline clicked into military precision. The home front mobilizes. Conversations shifted. Bread prices and summer trips gave way to draft lists and unit postings. Maps were studied as battle plans. Radios delivered triumphs, advances, prisoners, cities taken. Initial fear softened into a militarized euphoria. The economy shifted. Young men were called up, many volunteered. Stations filled with families saying goodbye, salutes raised, victory promised. Behind every wave was dread. Women knew life would change. Support circles formed, knitting winter clothes, organizing food drives. The home front became a second front. Winter breaks the illusion. The war became real when coal ran short, when bread turned darker and scarcer, when letters stopped coming. The pride of 1939 shifted by 1940 to 1941 into a slow routine of deprivation, surveillance and duty. Cities weren't trenches, but they were bastions of a mobilized rear guard. Families kept kitchen calendars, ration schedules, coal days, winter relief collections. Housewives led the coping. Stretch butter, replace milk with powder, use potato flour. Domestic ingenuity became patriotism. Neighborhood gatherings traded more than recipes: how to boil bones a third time, dye a shirt with beetroot, persuade the butcher for a scrap of fat. Posters praised these efforts. A soldier without a rifle was still a soldier if she kept the home standing. Badges marked donors to winter relief. Refusal looked suspicious. Social control tightened. Quiet comments, tired gestures, observed. Radios were restricted to national stations. Foreign broadcasts meant prison, or worse. The news was a straight line of triumphs. People accepted it, or pretended to. Letters from the front changed tone. Briefer, coded, naming cold, shortages, exhaustion. Mothers read between the lines. Some hid the letters, some burned them. The words from the front didn't always match the ministries. Uniform feelings, militarized youth. The people's community became an emotional script. Community nights for knitting, reading war reports, listening to speeches. Anguish had to be silent. Doubt concealed. Tears in public drew reproach. Patriotism was obligatory. Youth were mobilized harder. The Hitler Youth trained with weapons, mapped campaigns and marched. Teens learned to survive with little, to endure cold, to sleep less. At 15, many already knew how to shoot. Girls were sent to farms, offices, hospitals, nurseries. Female labor became essential. Factories reorganized shifts and targets. Efficiency manuals spread. Voluntary extra work was rewarded with certificates, lunch tickets, and free propaganda films. Those who lagged were isolated. Churches tolerated, controlled, framed sermons around sacrifice and obedience. Some pastors echoed power, some stayed silent, a few resisted openly. Their voices were thin, yet hope flickered. Images of Paris occupied, London bombed, Greece defeated, fed the belief that if everyone complied, peace would return. A peace of victors without enemies. Then the map changed again. 1941. Maps and pins. With the invasion of the Soviet Union, the Reich reached its widest edge. From the Atlantic to the gates of Moscow, the map looked tinted in German grey. Homes hung new maps. Mothers fixed pins where their sons fought. Children learned new names: Smolensk, Kiev, Rostov. People talked about oil, wheat, living space. The claim repeated, after this campaign, it would all be over. 1942. Total war, endless scarcity. By 1942, the illusion of a short war was dead. The failure before Moscow and the Red Army's resistance made it clear. The war would drag on and demand more. People felt it before it was shouted in the Sport Palace. This had to be total. Industrial cities, Essen, Hamburg, Dresden, Berlin, felt it hardest. Lines formed at dawn. Housewives carried cloth bags and notebooks of substitute recipes. Sugar became molasses. Milk became powder. Soap was scarce. Roots boiled into cleaners. The smell of sweat settled on trams, in schools, at offices. Complaints were risky. The front had it worse. The state entered the kitchen. Official recipes, survival manuals, radio hygiene tips. The state dictated food, clothing, routine. People obeyed even if they muttered. Need forced ingenuity and illegality. Women walked miles or pedaled to villages for potatoes and eggs. They returned with saddlebags full and fear of checkpoints. Trains were crowded with hidden bundles. The state cracked down. Raids, fines, prison, forced labor. Names of hoarders were posted outside city halls. It didn't stop. Even officials and party members bought and sold on the side. Everyone needed something. No one would starve for slogans. Work without rest, childhood without childhood. The war demanded bodies and nerves. Women replaced men in factories, offices, trams, shops. Double shifts were common. Factories ran day and night. Sirens cut sleep and sent people to basements in shoes and coats. Children grew up without fathers, and often without mothers. School became a corridor. Teens were sent to farms, munitions plants, trenches in occupied lands. Free time disappeared, childhood with it. Leisure dried up. Strength through joy was dismantled. Cinemas closed more often. Theatre became rare. Concerts gave way to lectures. Language grew dark and final. Letters from the front described mud and cold. Letters to the front carried perfume and kind lies. Tears on the home front were hidden behind curtains, away from neighbours, away from the block warden. Fear as fuel. Propaganda insisted on steel will and warned of degenerate enemies who would destroy Germany. It invoked fear. If Germany lost, revenge would be boundless. Bolshevism, hordes, terror bombings, phrases used to harden hearts. Each bomb was proof of enemies' hatred. Defeat wasn't an option, it was a foretold hell. Resist. If needed, die. 1943. Stalingrad breaks faith. In February 1943, the radio carried a different message. The Sixth Army had been lost at Stalingrad. The words were wrapped in heroism, honor, sacrifice. People understood. The war was being lost. Something broke. Not order, not obedience, but trust. The myth of the invincible soldier had held hope together. Stalingrad was a limit, nearly 300,000 encircled. Over 90,000 prisoners, tens of thousands dead. It stopped being a number. It became a telegram, an empty chair, a name that never returned. Mourning was regulated. Public grief was policed. Mothers who cried too long were marked. Girlfriends who withdrew were reprimanded. Morale had to stand. Condolence letters arrived with a pamphlet. Your son fell for Germany. Ceremonies were short, graves provisional, bodies absent. Only the hurt remained. Cities dimmed further. Blackouts deepened. Food lines became permanent. Trams overflowed. Coats were mended over patches. Recycling was enforced. Clothes, metals, cooking fat, paper, nothing wasted. People felt something else was being burned up. Morale, energy, patience. Whispers arrived about the East. Some began to grasp what camps meant. Not everyone knew details. Many suspected. Trains that didn't return. Towns gone quiet. Men back with stories they couldn't tell. Knowing was dangerous. Suspecting was worse. Silence became the refuge of millions. Hospitals filled with the wounded, young men without legs, faces, words. They were displayed as examples of sacrifice. Their eyes told another story. Women tended them in silence. Children stared. Fathers feared their sons would join those beds or not return at all. A word returned, durchhalten, endure, not in hope, as mandate. 1944, fire from the sky. By 1944, life became almost unbearable. Alongside hunger and absence came daily bombs. The Allies owned the sky. Clocks stopped after impacts. Mothers counted children leaving shelters. Bakers opened unsure they'd have a shop at dusk. The front no longer felt distant. It fell from above. Hunger became chronic. Markets emptied. Fruit vanished. Meat turned into memory. Lines for bread stretched with no guarantee at the end. Potatoes were the staple when they existed. Peels were eaten. Roots boiled. Ersatz became the rule. Barley brew, cabbage soup, flour cut with sawdust. Deficiency diseases multiplied. Anemia, rickets, tuberculosis. Children stopped growing. Women stopped menstruating. Bodies fought as best they could. Disillusionment moved quietly. It showed up in small acts. Someone called in sick to dodge a shift. A machine broke. An error went unfixed. Information got tucked away. Some mothers kept sons out of youth corps. Some teachers slipped censored poems into lessons. It wasn't rebellion. It was a way to feel human, to say no without the word. At home, women became the center of broken communities. Nurses, cooks, teachers, organizers. Many had no husbands, at the front, dead or lost. Sons grew up without guidance. Daughters carried adult weight. The future turned into a question nobody dared to ask. 1945. Collapse and reckoning. By early 1945, no one spoke of final victory. People spoke of surviving, holding on, saving the children. In shelters and trains packed with women and the elderly fleeing west, conversations were short and cut by engines, sirens, and panic. Winter iced over the rubble of cities that had become names on the radio. Civilian life dragged along the edges of a collapsing regime and a society that no longer knew itself. Defeat arrived before it was signed. It settled in faces and bones. Cities turned into open cemeteries: Berlin, Hamburg, Leipzig, Frankfurt, Essen. People moved like ghosts through ruins, looking for food, water, children, and often finding nothing. Women, grey with ash, pushed carts containing a pot, a coat, a box of damp papers. They had lost their homes, their husbands, and their faith. They kept walking. Stopping felt like letting go of life. Bombings were routine. The heavy part wasn't the sound, it was the silence after. Bells muted, schools closed, factories broken or empty. Streets full of shattered windows, people slept under broken roofs, cooked over makeshift braziers, boiled snow to drink. No heating. Electricity flickered or died, radios silent. The state was gone. The party, too. Only remains, dirty uniforms, portraits of the leader on piles of scorched paper. Fear shifted. It wasn't the enemy, it was tomorrow, looting, revenge, and what came from the east. Reports spread of mass assaults, executions, reprisals. They weren't just rumors. Columns of refugees fleeing Silesia, East Prussia, and Pomerania carried fear on their faces. Children stopped speaking, women didn't sleep. Some men, rather than be captured, offed themselves in stations and woods. Thousands tried to board trains that never came, or came full of wounded soldiers, the sick and the dead. Women became the last line, armed with buckets, sheets, and will. They shielded children from rain, cold, and drunken soldiers. Some carried poison, a hidden pistol, or only a prayer. They cut their hair, dirtied their faces, pretended illness to avoid the worst. Many were assaulted, sometimes repeatedly, sometimes in front of family. Dignity became a luxury. Survival, a silent verb. The party dissolved like smoke. Arms stopped raising. Armbands vanished. Portraits burned. Badges were buried. Speeches went mute. Some party men tried to blend in. New names, new stories. Others were arrested. Others ran. Truth didn't need names. It was in empty houses and broken streets, in trains that no longer left. Nazi Germany didn't collapse like a house of cards. It rotted from within and then fell. In the fall, it dragged millions, believers, the silent, the beneficiaries, the survivors, those who had no choice, into the same wound. In May 1945, the war ended. Peace did not. Occupation arrived, hunger arrived, judgment arrived, memory arrived. And for millions of civilians, the hardest part began. Living after surviving, looking backward, explaining the past to their children, rebuilding a country not only destroyed in its buildings but wounded in its soul.